Hello there everyone and welcome back. It is time finally to talk about the Necrons. They have been perhaps the most excited, the most hyped up faction in preparation for Armada 2, and there's a lot of reason behind that there. For the tabletop version had the Necrons as fundamentally the most overpowered faction in the game there, so much so that they inflated the amount of points that you actually get from destroying a Necron cruiser, or a Necron ship in general. So that ultimately means even though you are losing horribly against your Necron adversary, you can still come out ahead just if you've been able to somehow destroy a single ship, or ideally a single cruiser of some kind. You could still squeeze out the win after a humiliating massacre. But in the case of Armada 2, they did tone them down quite a bit to be a little more on par, since we don't have the convenience of just having a match ending abruptly halfway through, so you don't really have the need to do effective scoring after the fact. All we really have is the points just to kind of force an end, force a victory condition. Even then, they could have been something in play that allowed Necrons to be a little more expensive in this type of matchup. It's almost encouraged, I want to argue. But the Necrons are still an incredibly dangerous adversary, and you need to take what they're bringing to the table very, very seriously. For normally, the Necrons in the tabletop game had no access to fighters. What they did here is every single one of the cruiser capital ships in general have their own temporary hangar bays that can launch a single squadron of fighters. These aren't even tied into the weaponry at all, it's just the base order that you get access to. So you are restricting yourself from your other order abilities, but that's kind of like a very minor point when you consider the only other actual order currently available to the Necrons is just the ability to replenish their troops, and that, I would argue, is for a completely type of faction matchup you would be up against. Whereas Chaos or Eldar, which probably have the most type of fighters you need to worry about, as well as maybe an occasional custodian from the Tau, would be the most justified to have these scythes come on out to protect your fleet. But let's talk about the real meat of the Necron force, and that is their weaponry and their armament there. It's going to be a little bit weird when I talk about it later on how their weapons are designed, since a handful of their ships, including some of the newer variants that were introduced for the Shroud type light cruiser, have the majority of their weapons on the broadside as opposed to being actual turrets. So if you're familiar with the Necrons on the tabletop, you may get thrown off a tiny bit by this little circumstance. A lot of it may be due to the fact that their scythe cruisers are a little odd in that they have broadside lightning arcs, which is the macro cannons. These things still hit incredibly hard though, and to put it bluntly, these weapons do not miss. Both their lightning arcs and their gauze particle whip, which is their lance weaponry, will always hit a target even if they do have a bit of a travel time to them. So you're going to be hammering something down, and when you combo it with the lock-on order with the Necrons, which it goes by names of Dispersed Lightning Arc. All the orders are completely different from all the other factions as you understand it in Armada 1. In the case of Dispersed Lightning Arc, you basically have an AoE weapon now. Within a 9,000 unit range, your lightning arc, your macro cannon will hit everything within the radius. Mind you, all ships that are not your primary target, which you will have to establish beforehand by either setting them as a higher priority or focusing target on a certain ship, all the other ships outside that are going to take half damage. So it's not as ridiculous as it may seem, but you are still going to be doing a world of damage to everything if they are clumped up or in a tight formation. So you're going to be punishing your opponent heavily in that regard. And just when you thought it couldn't get any better with such a massive amount of AoE damage, the Star Pulse Cannon, the Necrons bring their own Nova Cannon into the fray, and it is a beast. Unlike the Nova Cannons and the Mechanicus I showed before, where I criticized how easy it potentially is to dodge for a regular cruiser or a light cruiser, outside of the usual Eldar and their mobility of course, these things will immediately burst after 2 seconds and damage everything around them. It will even be used to destroy bombers or fighters that are swarming your cruisers, so you have very valuable defensive utility with this thing if by chance you cannot even get close to your ship. There is an upgrade to enhance it further as one of your upgrade choices for your fleet, so you can really crank out the damage, but it has a really long cooldown as a result, longer than even the Nova cans, but you have unlimited charges, whereas the Nova cans are limited, at least currently, to just having 3 shots. So hang on to those dreams of murdering an entire fleet in an instant, because that is definitely possible with the Necrons. But how they function defensively is completely different too, at least from what all the other fleets function. For right from the very beginning of the match, your fleet has a buff called Hull Cauterization, and it may seem a little bit weird when I explain the effect in full, but simply put, your ships have a constant health regeneration to them. You are regenerating 1 health every second, and your what used to be your brace for order impact will triple the regeneration effect of this ability. There is one catch to it, however, in that the more health you regenerate, you slowly do downgrade or lose your maximum hit point potential. So ultimately what that basically means, like the Cairn battleship with like about 2,400 health is going to start losing its maximum hit point potential by the same rate you're regenerating. So every second you are regenerating with this ship, you are losing 1 additional hit point of what is your max amount of health. And what that ultimately means is there is eventually going to be a cap to the amount of hit points you regenerate. And it can be tricky to see this effect in action, for if you look very carefully at the health bar of your ships when they're selected, there is like a dark gray bar and then a hollowed out kind of gray bar, kind of like what you would see normally for all the other factions when morale or all the other health bars gone. There is like a darkened bar that shows what your true max health currently is that you can regenerate to. It is a bit of a weird system, but when you consider the fact that Necrons had a ridiculous amount of armor and resilience in the tabletop game, and with the current implementation of Armada 2, they just straight up have the standard 83 armor on all their ships. There was also a secondary shield that allowed them the option to negate Nova cans and lances a lot better, and I feel this is what the armor regeneration is supposed to help counteract to an extent. Although, with the Necrons not having like all head full and high energy turn as you would normally know, they just straight up have a built-in micro warp jump for all their ships, and this can be incredibly useful for dodging the Nova cans, since that almost feels like what they're weakest against, outside of incredibly dedicated amount of lance weaponry. Although keep in mind, this has a substantial cooldown, I believe roughly around 90 seconds, so it's going to be nowhere near as quick, I feel, for like micro warp jump as an admiral skill for all the other factions. I don't quite recall if it works with the reload function, mind you. That's something that will probably have to be playtested a little bit more, but you will be able to dodge 1, maybe 2 Nova cans very easily, but then you're kind of a sitting duck, and there is a lot of uncertainty to Necron's survivability for sheer burst damage potential in that regard. Although thankfully, Nova cans of that sheer number is only relegated to the Imperial Navy and the Adeptus Mechanicus, so if they're not a popular faction as we get near live release, you may not have to worry about that as much. It's just the lances which may be something to worry about, which you have a lot of means, of course, just hiding your ships or at least shielding them behind others, to help weather that storm as your health just naturally regenerates for you to get that longevity. The only downside with all this power and potential we're seeing from Necrons, outside of the being burst down like I already mentioned, is the range of their weapons is incredibly short. If this was in an Armada 1, their range would basically be 6,000 units, and their lock-on, as I've already shown for the Adeptus Mechanicus and all the other factions, they do not get the extended range. It's just strictly that AoE effect that they're gaining with that order. So there may be some odd situations where you may have to jump into the fray to maximize your damage potential with this fleet, and with them being a little more costly than all the other fleets, hell, even the matches I've been showing you right now is only like 4 cruisers and 2 frigates, which is a very small fleet and almost looks like the Imperial Navy equivalent to what I used to feel in Armada 1, which was basically 4 cruisers and a single frigate, I believe, for 700 points. So they will likely get outnumbered in some of the more, when facing off against some of the cheaper type of fleets there. Eldar, with them being heavily inflated into points, you may actually outnumber them potentially, depending on what you and your Eldar adversary are fielding. So that's going to be a very weird exchange, and like I said already, it's going to feel a little bit jarring for multiple reasons. I already talked about how multiple of your cruisers have broadside weaponry as opposed to true 270-degree arc weaponry. Hell, even their standard boarding assault has 270-degree radius, so you are going to have an easy time boarding, and they are good at boarding. They're slightly above average from what I'm seeing, so I haven't looked at Tyranids or the Space Marines just yet to see if they're like even better at boarding or if they're on par with Necrons, but Necrons have higher troop value and they have better boarding potential, so they're still going to be really resilient in close, and with what I already discussed earlier, potentially them having the lowest range of all the other fleets, they are going to be very vicious in close. It's just a matter of how well can they stay on top of their opponent there while weathering all that damage. Since you do have a slight conflict of interest with the slower health regeneration and the need to at least keep in a nice close distance if you're facing off against Chaos or anything that's longer range centric, you are going to be taking a lot of damage over time. So a smart use of your microwarp drive, or rather your inertialist drive, is going to be pretty key, and that is tied to your engines from what I understand. So if you ever get a critical hit of some kind, your inertialist drive is going to be knocked out, at least temporarily for most effects. Since you don't have emergency repair anymore, since I failed to mention that earlier with the Necrons, and a lot of that's because any temporary damage, light damage you take to your ships will automatically be regenerated after a minute. So you don't even need the emergency repair in most cases, because all of the damage effects eventually going to repair itself. And hell, I think there's even an upgrade or admiral skill that allows you to even repair permanently damaged components if you use it right, which gives Necrons a lot more longevity outside just the hit point regeneration itself. So good luck trying to weather these things down if you are not really equipped to deal with them properly. So this is what the fleet roster looks like for the Necrons. They have pretty much what you would already expect there in the Shroud, the Harvester, and the Cairn Tomb ship, but the additions here with the Reaper, the Cartouche, and the Kopej, these are the new additions that the Tyndalls decide to add, and it's kind of an interesting, a fun treat to see a battlecruiser being implemented into the roster. It's just a shame it looks a little bit similar to the Scythe, which does have that unique appearance as a compared at least to the light cruisers and the battleship. One other thing to note, I mentioned before how a lot of the ships tend to have like broadside type of macro cannons. The Scythe Reaper kind of eliminates that altogether in that it allows for it to shoot 270 degrees with all its lightning arcs. So this thing is going to be a bit of a beast, and probably intended to be used as a substitute for a Cairn battleship if you don't want to go so point heavy. Hell, you may even want to go with two of these if the situation warrants it. But I haven't really talked about the Shroud light cruiser at all in this episode. And what it has to bring to the Necron fleet is it has the Tau stealth alloy. The Tau themselves no longer have this upgrade available to them, and the Shroud has a baseline right off the bat. It's going to be used probably for scouting and a little bit of harassment there, since it does have the same armor as everything else, and it even has the Widowmaker's type of sensor range. In this case, it would be 13,500 units. Which remains to be seen how useful this will be for the Necrons when you consider the fact that all the Necron weaponry can really only shoot like about 9,000 range. It's really the God's Particle Whip that can shoot a little bit farther, but they are more for softening up a target and not being the real punch of the fleet. So thank you everyone for watching here. It has been interesting looking over the Necron fleet, for they don't quite have the overpowered nature I kind of was secretly hoping for, especially since we are looking at like a domination style type of map layout where you have to capture on points, so you could have easily had a means to increase the point value you could have gotten from killing a Necron ship to justify them having extra power. And that could still very well happen as we get closer to release, but at the end of the day they still are bringing a lot of unique weapons and a lot of ridiculous firepower. It just remains to be seen how all these tools will function for a real-time environment, as a lot of the other factions will be able to outrange them for a good long period of time, kind of prompting the Necrons to use the inertialist drive, which then removes it being used as a means to dodge like Novacans or even torpedoes for that matter. So time will tell how the Necron perform, and if they are going to get tweaks to what I already hinted at before, to make them deliberately more powerful and change the dynamic around them entirely.